What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Today we are talking about Exodus chapter 16. In case you're wondering what happened previously, obviously with it being Exodus, it was the Israelites leaving their slavery in Egypt, and then they celebrated, and then they kind of started their venture through the wilderness, past the Red Sea, got to a couple of, I guess, oases is the proper pluralization of the word oasis. Anyway, and that's kind of where we find ourselves here. So, let's hop right in. Exodus 16. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. "If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt," they moaned. "There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death." How quickly they lose faith. But anyway, isn't that kind of like us sometimes, though? We have, some good things come our way, and we're like, oh, yay, praise God. But then hard times come, and we start to doubt that God was the one being good to us previously. Because, something in our heads just doesn't like the idea of God being good one moment and then letting bad things happen at another moment. Even if that's usually sort of, for our own growth or benefit or whatever, or even if that's just life in general. But anyway, let's take a look at the footnotes here. So it makes me wonder if this should actually even be pronounced sin. Or maybe that's sin, and we've been pronouncing Sinai wrong all these years. Maybe it's supposed to be Sinai. But I'll go with the more common pronunciations anyway. But this is a geographical place that goes by that name, not to be confused with the word that we call sin, which is, doing stuff that God doesn't like, essentially. So this is not it's not like they called this the wilderness of wrongdoing. It's just because it's geographically related to Sinai, that's kind of the derivation of the name. 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt, the Exodus had occurred on the 15th day of the first month, because God had kind of established for them their particular first month, which is generally believed to be somewhere in, springtime, as we think of the calendar year. But anyway, so then, now with it being the 15th day of the second month, it had been a whole month after they left Egypt. Anyway, but people are moaning and complaining about not having food. Which, again, if we don't get our needs met, sometimes we kind of wonder where God is in all this and why God would let something like that happen, even if we know God did good things for us before. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. Verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "By evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. What have we done that you should complain about us?" Then Moses added, "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening, and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us." So, little more defensiveness from Moses there than one might expect, but anyway. So God says, "All right, people are complaining about food. I'm going to give them food. Just let them know I'm going to give them food, and not to doubt me." So I still can't help but wonder why Moses is so defensive in all this. I mean, it did say that, the people complained about Moses and Aaron as if perhaps it was their leadership that may have resulted in a lack of food or something like that. I mean, they were also the ones that led them out of Egypt in the first place, like, kind of physically speaking, verbally, even though God really was the one behind all that. Which, that's probably why Moses and Aaron are like, you're lodging your complaints against us, but God's the one who had this idea in the first place. God's the one who took you out of Egypt. We just sort of, told you what to do and how to follow God's lead there. Anyway, verse 9. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Announce this to the entire community of Israel. Present yourselves before the Lord, for he has heard your complaining." And Aaron spoke to the whole community of Israel. And as Aaron spoke to the whole community of Israel, they looked out toward the wilderness. There they could see the awesome glory of the Lord in the cloud. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat, and in the morning you will have all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." Okay, so kind of repetitious there, although the whole cloud thing, I wonder if that was, like the same cloud, or at least something that looked like the same cloud that had sort of led them out of Egypt and like sort of guided them where to go in a sense. But anyway, otherwise it's pretty much repeating what was said before. So, verse 13. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning, the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. "What is it?" they asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, "It is the food the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent." Okay, so had a thought, but I should probably save that for later because it'll probably explain it in the text. But a lot of times to my understanding at least, when people think about the wilderness, they tend to think like desert. This wilderness wasn't necessarily desert. It could have been more like, savanna type terrain, or just broad plains that may have been kind of a, like sporadic, or, just kind of spread out grass here and there. It wasn't necessarily that arid as a desert. It might have been, more like kind of somewhere between that and a meadow, you could say. Because, dew does not gather in the desert. If there's, grass on the ground, though, or some other thing like that, it's a little bit more understandable to have dew or something that would evaporate and create this flaky substance. Anyway, footnote here regarding 2 quarts. The Hebrew says 1 omer, which is 2.2 liters. 2 quarts wouldn't really quite be equal to that, I wouldn't think. Because, maybe it's close-ish, because it's over 3 liters in a gallon, kind of closer slightly to 4 liters. So then I guess if you're rounding that up and then you take half, that's 2 liters, which, 2 quarts is definitely half a gallon. Anyway, I'm just trying to think through, the very English/American unit of measurement here. Also, why are they using liquid measurements for something that's supposed to be, kind of solid or flaky? Maybe just because it's, really fine, so, it's almost closer to, a salt, or I don't know, in terms of, size and whatnot. But anyway, it's just whatever. Anyway, so 2 quarts may not be the most accurate way of thinking about it, but a little over 2 liters. At least that's the estimation based off of the Hebrew word there. Anyway, moving on to verse 17. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Because they followed the 2 quarts / 1 omer suggestion per person, I guess. Hebrew measured it with an omer, so I guess, similar to how we might have measuring cups or spoons or things like that, they may have had a particular bowl or other container that it was understood was 1 omer, and they just gathered that much for each person. Okay, verse 19. Then Moses told them, "Do not keep any of it until morning." But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, each family according to its need. And as the sun became hot, the flakes they had not picked up melted and disappeared. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. He told them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath day set apart for the Lord. So bake or boil as much as you want today, and set aside what is left for tomorrow." So, I mean, if 2 quarts per person was just right, essentially, for one day, then having 4 quarts they gathered would have been, yeah, anyway. And, of course, this is probably based off of the Hebrew being 2 omers. So, some of the people tried to save some for later, possibly out of concern that God would eventually stop providing this substance. But then when they did, it went bad. So that's pretty much how it worked out, that they didn't wind up with more than they needed, or, didn't try and like stockpile it. And essentially, it turned into an exercise in trusting God to give them enough. Because they had to just collect what they needed for the day every morning. Other than on the 6th day, I assume it would have been visually apparent that there was like double the amount. So all the more reason for them to know that they had to gather more. And Moses might have told them that already anyway, who knows. But anyway, verse 24. So this is after Moses told them about, having a Sabbath rest and taking double as much on the 6th day because of that. So anyway, verse 24. So they put some aside until morning, just as Moses had commanded. And in the morning the leftover food was wholesome and good, without maggots or odor. Moses said, "Eat this food today, for today is a Sabbath day dedicated to the Lord. There will be no food on the ground today. You may gather the food for 6 days, but the 7th day is the Sabbath. There will be no food on the ground that day." So I'm trying to think of when the Sabbath was initially established. What is this, the first establishment of the Sabbath, or I'm not remembering, because the Sabbath in general is understood as a day of rest, and in part because of, I guess, relating that to this, in part because God wants it to be a day of rest and not needing to go out and collect food for the day. That's why God gave them double the previous day, and, is allowing that to stay fresh for the 2nd day, so they don't have to go out and work to collect it for that day. But I just, if anybody can help me on when the Sabbath tradition was actually established, if at all, before this, please let me know, because I'm just blanking on whether or not this is essentially the first mention of it. So, anyway, verse 27. Some of the people went out anyway on the 7th day, but they found no food. The Lord asked Moses, "How long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions? They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you. That is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day, so there will be enough for 2 days. On the Sabbath day, you must each stay in your place. Do not go out to pick up food on the 7th day." So the people did not gather any food on the seventh day. The Israelites called the food manna. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like honey wafers. So, footnote on manna there, it means, what is it? That was something I was debating on commenting about before, but I remembered that it was probably going to explain that eventually anyway. So, because the people don't like following instructions, apparently, at least not until they have proof of a reason that they should follow those instructions. So some of them tried to go out and gather food on the seventh day, but there was nothing there. So then God's a little like, okay, really? I told you all this. Moses told you all this. Why are you still trying to do this thing? I'm doing a good thing for you, giving you a day of rest, that you don't have to go out and work to gather this. Alright? So don't gather food. Don't go out, I should say, on the seventh day. No food will be there. Oh, man. God has so many reasons to be frustrated with the Israelites all throughout, I mean, really, like, the entirety of the Bible, but especially here in Exodus. Just goes to show you that God is indeed patient. Anyway, okay. Verse 32. Then Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Fill a 2-quart, probably 1 omer, container with manna to preserve it for your descendants. Then later generations will be able to see the food I gave you in the wilderness when I set you free from Egypt." So, this kind of hints at, them eventually being out of the wilderness in the promised land where they won't need, or trying to think of how, I was going to say where they won't need the manna from God, but I mean, ultimately anything we get comes from God. So, basically, once they leave the wilderness and make it to the promised land, God will no longer be providing this manna for them. They'll have, quote-unquote normal food. Maybe I don't need to air quote that, I don't know. But they'll have the food that they would expect to get by, other methods that they're already familiar with. Anyway. But, of course, God, I guess, wants a reminder to future generations of, how he continued to provide for his people in the wilderness, even when there are no other signs of, food supplies. So anyway, okay. Verse 33, probably going to just wrap up the chapter here. Moses said to Aaron, "Get a jar and fill it with 2 quarts of manna. Then place it in a sacred place before the Lord to preserve it for all future generations." Again, 2 quarts. It was probably actually 1 omer, because when it said 2 quarts before, it gave the footnote of it being 1 omer. Just saying. Anyway, Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He eventually placed it in the Ark of the Covenant, in front of the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. Interesting that they bring up the Ark of the Covenant already. But anyway, so the people of Israel ate manna for 40 years until they arrived at the land where they would settle. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. The container used to measure the manna was an omer, which was 1/10 of an ephah. It held up about 2 quarts. So again, the explanation of the Omer and how much it held and that kind of stuff. But yeah, the Ark of the Covenant, like, isn't even a thing yet in the story. But because this was written after the fact, when the Ark of the Covenant is a thing, then, you know, it's explaining that, hey, this item that served as this reminder of God's provision in the wilderness was placed in the Ark of the Covenant, which, you know, the readers or hearers of this would have already known about. So, so yeah, this is already kind of explaining what I said before about, you know, them eating manna while they were in the wilderness until they got to the promised land in Canaan, or at least the border of Canaan. And let's see here. Oh yeah, the footnote there. Hebrew is, he placed it in front of the testimony. Instead of in front of the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. Gotcha. I guess that was kind of their name that they gave those tablets. And then footnote here. Yeah. The part saying that it held about 2 quarts seems like it might have just been added in for, you know, current English readers. Because the measurements Omer and Ephah are completely foreign to us. Anyone reading this in the original Hebrew would have probably understood, or any of the original readers or hearers who would have known the Hebrew and all the words and measurements and what they meant and how much they were and all that kind of stuff would have already understood this. But I feel like I'm guessing at least everything after the semicolon here was for our sake in this day and age, just so we can understand it better. So yeah, long story short, people complain about not having food in the wilderness. God provides it. He tells them how it's going to work. They don't listen, but God makes it so they kind of get the point eventually anyway. And, yeah, then kind of hinting at... It also mentions already that they're in the wilderness for 40 years, which you would wonder why it takes that long, but that's kind of hinting at things to come, and I won't get into too much detail on that. So, anyway, I guess that about wraps it up for Exodus 16. Alright, so that's going to do it for this time around. Not really too much to add there. Kind of explained all my thoughts already. So anyway, yeah, as always, like the video if you enjoyed, share it with others if you want them to see, subscribe and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Make sure you look down in the description for info on other social media pages, and yeah, leave comments down below all that with any thoughts you have. So that's it. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next one, but until then, stay cool, people.